Welcome to CyberBytes The Podcast. I'm Oliver Legg, co-founder of Aspiron Search, and today welcome Richard Bird, Chief Security Officer at Traceable. Richard tells his story of how a bottle of tequila led to an incredible career in tech, then cyber, and we cover some important but not broadly talked about topics around how the role of the CISO has changed in recent years. Enjoy the show. So, Richard, welcome to the show.
Glad to be here.
Good stuff. I should have said in that intro as well that you're known as being the king of the metaphor within the cybersecurity space. So I hope you'll be dropping a few on us on this call.
You never know; they just seem to fly out of the top of my head. I always kind of phrase it this way when I'm public speaking. I say it's kind of like NASCAR. People come to see me speak because they're convinced that I'm either going to crash and burn or I'm going to take the checkered flag and win. And I think it's usually a 50-50. Actually, I think a lot of people show up and they go, I hope he crashes and burns, and he still wins, because not every metaphor works. But they do just seem to kind of jump out of the top of my head.
Yeah, well, you've kicked off with one about NASCAR already, so keep them coming. Well, no, great to have you here. I know you're pretty much fresh off a plane from the Guide Point event over in Las Vegas, and interestingly enough, saw you dressed up as Ricky Bobby's. So what was the story behind that on stage?
Wow. When the opportunity came up, the actual event at the Guide Point company kickoff was a tiger cage, which I thought was an interesting premise. The octagon. They picked a couple of new innovation providers in the security solution space to get up and give a presentation, and speed round, like 8 minutes or so, and then 6 minutes of questions. And I feel bad because I have an unfair advantage. I think at last count in the last 6 years, I've spoken some 500 times. And when you have that kind of level of practice, it makes it kind of easy to jump into a challenge like that. But I also know the audience at Guide Point. Matter of fact, I have many friends there. And I knew that they would have a shared appreciation for my love of lowbrow humor. And the only trick for me was figuring out how to put this Ricky Bobby jersey and the other pieces for the event underneath multiple layers of clothes. Um, I had blazer on, and I was actually taking things off, and not die from heat exhaustion in the hour and a half before it took to get on stage. And I successfully navigated that challenge. But yeah, it was really, I think a lot of this comes back to kind of mentoring and guidance that I share with people that say, hey, I'd love to do what you do for a living. I'd love to go and just talk to people. And I'm like, it's more than talking to people. There's preparation, there's understanding your audience. And most importantly, and I think, for something like Talladega Nights, and Ricky Bobby and all of the characters in that film, there's this need in security and technology for us to do a better job to connect with our audiences emotionally. And once you have an emotional connection, you can really talk about, any, layer and depth of technology and engineering that you want to. But when people become personally invested in a conversation that means something to them, and a lot of people know if you ain't first, you're last from, Talladega Nights, and that's a connection point. You end up with a much more enjoyable interaction with folks. And I am proud to say that, and it's not just me, I just get a chance to hold the microphone. I am proud to say that Traceable did win the competition in that tiger cage by a substantial margin. There was live voting on the floor, and that's exactly what I was hoping for an outcome.
Yeah, awesome. Well, hopefully you can take some credit for it. It's interesting that you said so many people come up to you and say that they would love to do what you do and fly around, talk to people, do the public speaking events. But the other thing they probably forget to realize is that in order to get to that position is that you've got a huge wealth of experience in a multitude of different industries and security areas. So I think that's a kind of nice way to transition into your background and kind of really going back to how how did it all begin for Richard? How did you get into security initially? And then how did your career evolve to where you are today?
Yeah. You know, my career is nothing more than a wonderful series of serendipitous events. I don't believe in luck, but I believe fully in serendipity. And I love the Webster's Dictionary definition for serendipity, discovering something that you were not searching for. And I think serendipity offers up an opportunity as well for a choice in the moment. And I've had a lot of people in my career that saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, going all the way back to how I got into technology to begin with. I was a construction project manager after I came out of the United States Army. And my late wife was working for a technology company and in the middle 90s. And we went to a Christmas party, and there was a gentleman there who's now a lifelong friend and mentor who pulled frozen tequila out of his freezer, and we did shots. And he said, if you can manage a Walmart store construction project, you can manage a mainframe migration. And I didn't know the difference between a mainframe and a toaster oven at that point. I still rib him about it. That only tequila makes that conversation make sense. But it really was a starting point for me. And I always like to tell people, like, there are opportunities in your life where you unexpectedly find out what you are naturally good at. Particularly if you're willing to exercise intellectual curiosity, not get complacent or get satisfied with where you're at, but are always curious, always asking questions, always trying to find new ways. And most importantly for me, constantly raising your hand and volunteering for stuff that other people wouldn't do. The real hallmark for my entire technology career has nothing to do with any of the stuff that I do today. It has to do with when I was working for a payment processing company, the company that I was actually hired into that I mentioned. There were a bunch of people sitting around the room one day in a product meeting, and a person came in and said, "Look, we have a company that is not a bank, 128-bit encryption. They have no regulatory financial requirements or backing around doing payments, and they're on the internet. And who wants that project?" And everybody that was in that room was used to the way that banking and payment structures had already, existed for, multiple decades. And I said, "I'll do it." And it turned out to be Yahoo Bill Pay. And then I did AOL Bill Pay. And then I did the very beginnings of internet payments by accident, simply because I wasn't afraid to say, let's jump into this thing. Now, flash forward, IT ops career was fantastic. I became a CIO. But then an opportunity came to join early beginnings of centralized information security at JP Morgan Chase. Again, another person that saw something in me I didn't see in myself. Fantastic resource. Amy Geiger, who's at Accenture now, is now a lifelong friend and mentor of mine. And she just said, I need somebody that can, do identity. What she didn't tell me is because nobody else wanted the job. So once again, I didn't volunteer for that one. I was
Did
voluntold.
you volunteer after another frozen bottle of tequila, or
Yeah, another
was this a sober decision?
yeah, another tequila. Um, and that led into what became the monster, experience in my career, which was global head of identity for JP Morgan Chase's consumer business, which is, this is a long, circuitous route to get to the point of the question that you asked, which was in accumulating all of that experience, and then finally making a personal decision that I'd reached my bridge of unacceptable compromises, which was dealing with corporate politics for another, year or 10. After 20 years of being the corporate side, I decided that I wanted to step out and do some advising, and advising led to accidentally to solutions. Andre Duran at Ping Identity called me up and said, "I saw you speak, come work for me." Again, serendipity. But the one thing that I'd like to share with people, like this is the arc that my career took. And it landed me squarely in this very interesting space and a type of job that a lot of people are very, very interested in. Everybody that I know that does the kind of work that I do, and once you start to do this work, you get to circulate with lots of people with this kind of a job. Everybody that I know is a 30-year overnight sensation in the making. Every one of those folks have spent years, decades, working in, as you mentioned, multiple security disciplines and multiple organizations. And it takes it takes not just accumulating those 20 or 30 years of experience. It takes, once you get into this kind of role, forgetting all of the ego part of those accomplishments for all of those years.
Mhm.
Because the one thing that a market hates is an expert that's a know-it-all, right? We are always aggressive at tearing down our heroes. And so you have to be able to enter into these roles and park all of that experience, all of the, I've seen that before, all of the, you don't want to do it that way. You have to park all of that immediate corporate type of experience response that you want to give and realize that you're there to help people. You're there to help people and make their jobs easier, not harder. And that's a very difficult switch for people to change moving into these types of roles. That's where you see people succeed and fail in these field evangelist, market-facing type positions, because the test becomes, are you somebody that people are actually interested in, or are you somebody that is just espousing all of the amazing stuff that they know?
Mhm.
Um, and and that really is the demarcation line at success or failure in these positions.
Mm. And I mean, it's similar to a consulting role, really, in the fact that you're getting in front of so many different businesses at so many different stages in their security maturity. And I guess it's that ability to realize that the conversation yesterday is potentially completely irrelevant to the conversation that you're sitting in today. And how do you adapt to that? What else is different between the enterprise security world and vendor land as a kind of security practitioner anyway?
Yeah, the enterprise security world is defined in one word: atrophy. Um, and it's not, I'm not using it as a criticism or a negative statement. What I'm saying is that after nearly 40-ish years of the development of security as a discipline in the enterprise setting, and frankly, technology writ large as well, we've entered this age. I like to call it in security the cybersecurity industrial complex. We've entered this age where there have been landed and entrenched budgets, developments and growth of massive numbers of staff and employees with subject matter and domain expert knowledge. And what has that resulted in? It's resulted in an atrophication of our security approaches because we can't be agile anymore in the enterprise space. We can't be flexible. Every conversation with any innovative, security solution provider is can you integrate to these 27 things that we're not going to get rid of?
Mhm.
Um, and because of the way that we've built these, this is a laden term, but monolithic security architectures, they are very difficult to change. So I asked a question probably last year on LinkedIn in a survey. And I said, if a brand new threat manifested and there was a solution provider that could mitigate the risk or threat of that brand new threat that you've discovered, how long would it take your company to make a decision and a choice to purchase what was necessary and implement it? And I think about 25% of the group said like 6 months. And then another 50% said 6 months to 2 years. And then the remainder said never. And I was like, well, I really appreciate the honesty for the most part in those
Mhm.
responses, right? Because it's reflective of the friction and the challenge that you have, the lack of the inertia that you have in the corporate side. Solution side, like the solution side is just as easy to frame up as why it's different. The solution side, I am continuously shocked. And this is not a statement about Traceable. Traceable, obviously, I'm on staff, and hopefully our perspective is different. But I am consistently shocked by security solution creators, innovators, who have no idea the actual business problem that they're solving for a customer.
Mhm.
They've never sat in the seat. They've never managed a function. They make an assumption based upon a market opportunity, typically, right? And here, this is unserved or this is green field. And then you have a bunch of investors that go, wow, sounds great. We can make a ton of money off of that. But then when you start having conversations with those solution providers in a enterprise operations context, they go, okay, well, we can do this. And as a somebody working in an atrophied organization filled with inertia, you go, yeah, but that's not actually how we'd use it. We would never actually take a direct feed of this information from your solution and make a decision. We would take that feed and then use it to feed Splunk to provide all of the blinky lights for everything else that we do, and then we'd do something with it. And that lack of understanding of the business problems is where we continuously see this ships passing each other in the night problem, where security solution providers are out there waving the flag going, if you had bought this, you wouldn't have suffered this breach. And then you have people like me that are going, that is the stupidest thing that a security solutions provider could ever say, because you have no perspective about what that extended landscape inside of that customer looks like. And your solution may have solved this particular piece, but downstream in the overall process and transaction flows, it would have had no relevance or bearing, and it wouldn't have saved that customer from anything. And now you just forgive my language, but now you just look like a jackass because you're ambulance chasing as a marketing technique, which obviously is a very problematic issue within the solution side as well.
Well, there's been some pretty key events over the last couple of years. One that immediately springs to mind in the last 12 months that, there's some vendors that I think have shot themselves in the foot a bit in terms of respect across the industry for how they have, ambulance chased certain events. But it's an interesting point because, I mean, what we do as a business is we're staffing cybersecurity vendors. And when you look at, our sweet spot is kind of early to growth stage, very little public or kind of post IPO businesses. And the vast majority of them are their go-to-market sales marketing that have just always come from a sales background or a sales engineering or a customer success background. You've then got the software engineers that really can come from anywhere. And then maybe one or two folk who have come from an actual practitioner background. And I had a Harshil, the CEO and founder of Tromso, if you're aware of those guys, on a few weeks ago, and he was saying that there's a surprisingly low number of successful ex-security leaders or CISOs turned successful security founders. So it ties in with the kind of gap that you're talking about.
Well, there's a very obvious reason for the lack of success, and this is so two parts to this. First is that I worry very much that the cybersecurity ecosystem is badly damaged. And it could be badly damaged because of the messaging of ambulance chasing. It could be badly damaged because one of the things that I say frequently is, when I get pushback from a colleague or a friend that's still on the corporate side and they go, well, that's just fear, uncertainty, and doubt. You're selling FUD. And my response is you're not afraid. You're not afraid, right? In today's environment, you're telling me that fear, uncertainty, and doubt has no place in our thinking and our decision making. And I'm like, you're being untruthful. You're being disingenuous, right? Because if you're not afraid, you're not paying attention. However, because of this kind of weird reality that we have in a market where solutions providers are not on the same sheet of page with the enterprise space, what I find is that as security practitioners join companies like I have, or they found companies in the security side, they run into two very, very specific problems. The first is that many times, and this isn't just isolated to security practitioners, it's also very, very smart, innovative technology founders. They think smart is enough. Smart is not enough. You can have the smartest solution, you can have the most technically, amazing solution on the planet, and there is zero guarantee of success, because smart is only a component of it. And the second is that if you come from practitioner's background, if you come from corporate or enterprise, and this is one of the points that I say frequently, people go, I would like to have a job like you. I was very, very fortunate. I grew up in a family business. I grew up in a family business that was predicated on selling from the time I was 12 years old. So I learned what it meant to be a seller. I've never wanted to be one. However, when you get into these types of roles and you are under the misconception that your job is to sound smart or produce smart things, but not sell anything,
Mm.
then you will fail in these positions. And a lot of people, they feel that selling is beneath them. That isn't necessarily a conscious decision. It is a subconscious decision in many cases for people, and they think that selling is beneath them. And I was very fortunate. My dad, really successful small business person on his own. He said when I was probably 14 or 15 years old, you need to understand every job you'll have in your life is marketing and sales. I understand that dynamic. I do not have that reflexive response when somebody asks me to go talk to a customer and do something as disgusting as say, would you consider, bringing Traceable on board, not having problems with that. In many cases, people who come out of structured corporate roles or who come out of very, very interesting expert roles in our practitioner population, they can't change that gear. And that is why they do struggle and frequently fail in those kind of roles.
Mm. Well, the product's their baby and they expect to get the calls asking for it, I guess, rather than realizing the stuff that goes on the background to get those signatures.
Yep.
And I was reading a blog and we spoke about this a few weeks ago, but there was a blog that you commented on around the lost opportunity that enterprise businesses are massively missing out on by having poor security. And I think we talked about I think it was the T-Mobile breach.
Mm-hmm.
And it's an interesting one because a lot of people see, well, breach, loss of revenue, downtime, potential brand damage. But what do you mean by lost opportunity when you talk about that?
Well, what I mean is a return to really the core principles of business that have guided capitalistic society for centuries, right? Which is we used to do business with who we trusted. And when the digital age really boomed, we lost a focus on trust and stewardship. And it happened without us even knowing it, right? Everything became this cool Harry Potter, Hogwarts school of technical wizardry. Look what we can do. Let's go make this. Let's go do that. Like, even back to my days, internet bill payment. Like, that's dumb. Who would want to do that? Now you reel forward, 25 plus years, and you're like, when was the last time you wrote a check? Right? Like, these are the kind of massive changes that happen even with kind of big bubble escalations. They really happen to us incrementally over time, and then all of a sudden we wake up in the morning 25 years later and we go, oh, another breach, another hack, all my data gone. Now the big news about the mother of all breaches, the aggregation of all of this personal data that has been stolen from multiple breaches and exploits now aggregated into a single file. And we're just, I think that we're inappropriately shocked. Like the way that I like to phrase it is, what did you think the bad guys were going to do with all this data? Why would you be shocked that they're manifested this Moab event
Mm.
of this massive amount of data about all of us, when all you had to do is look at what's been happening for year upon year upon year, right? And so what I talk about when it comes to this using security, as an opportunity, it is going back to trust. And I always phrase it this way. I mean, you might have an answer to this personally. Who in your digital world do you actually trust? All of your digital relationships. You got
I
anybody?
know personally.
Uh,
Generally.
Yeah. I will tell you, I trust one singularly, and it's my banking relationship.
Mm,
And the reason is not just because that organization has what I believe is some of the best security in banking writ large, and I'm not going to name names, but I've
mm,
been a customer of theirs for 32 years, right? And anytime something has kind of happened to turn my head as a consumer, I say, oh, that would be interesting. I actually default back to, but do I trust them? Right? Do I
mm,
trust them with my data? And so what I think we're going to see, especially with the advent of the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau here in the States, the focus on open banking, which is actually following, very slowly behind other places in the world where it's been rolled out.
mm,
We're starting to see organizations like the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau flex and say, you have an obligation to your customers to restore trust and faith. You have an obligation to be a good steward. Good stewardship is a word that's been entirely lost in the business world. I gave you my data because I wanted to be a customer of yours. I didn't give you my data so that when I push unsubscribe on the email list, you go sell my email address to 20 different data aggregators, right? That's poor stewardship. And I think that we need to look at this goes way beyond reputational, right? We need to look at what does it take to restore faith in my customer base, in me as a company. And the reality is that if you're a trusted company, like right now, if you had a choice between any of the digital channels and outlets that you used, and you had one of those digital providers, say an Apple, who's actually been doing some of this lately, messaging that if you do business with us, you will be safer and your data will be more secure, and we respect your privacy.
mm.
Which one are you going to go with in today's day and age? I already know the answer to that because I already know what all the surveys say. I already know what Apple, shared when they gave the opportunity for you to turn off tracking at the application level, and what we saw consumers do. Consumers are dying and thirsty for a trusted relationship with a good steward, and that is the opportunity that we're missing.
Mm, yeah, yeah, awesome. And you said earlier about when talking about kind of security practitioners, essentially saying, well, why aren't you scared? Why aren't you conscious and nervous of what's going on? And I think there's two parts to that with some things that have happened over the last kind of 18 months, 2 years, and some pretty high profile cases as well. But there's the impact of the breach itself, but then there's the personal impact that has now come into play with security leaders' roles. And obviously the case we're referring to is Uber and Joe Sullivan.
Yep.
And it would be interesting to hear from your perspective how you feel the role of the CISO, that top seat, in large enterprises that have boards, they have a C-suite. How has that changed in your perspective?
Well, I think the Sullivan case in particular, but the SolarWinds case as well, is drawing attention to a really deep, dark secret that a lot of companies have kind of buried from the general public that now is becoming clear was a bad choice to begin with, which is the old argument of who the CISO should report to. And what I'm seeing now, it isn't just who the CISO should report to. It was always the argument as a CIO, CTO, general counsel, so on and so forth. But nobody ever really addressed the elephant in the room, which is why is that CISO actually not a functional member of the C staff,
Mm,
right? We get these cool C titles, right? But we do not get a seat at the C level staff table. When you're a one down from a CIO, from a general counsel, those folks have a seat at the table.
mm,
You are on the outside looking in. And with the SEC breach reporting changes, with everything that Uber and SolarWinds is going through relative to the DOJ and the SEC, it is drawing some really strong attention to the fact that look, you're going after a guy like Joe, and Joe didn't sit at the C level. Like, Joe was providing information to a host of people who were making decisions based upon that information and business priorities and funding and so on and so forth. So when somebody made a decision to say, well, look, we're not going to disclose that, I can almost guarantee you that none of the actors that are on the CISO side of the equation were going, my recommendation is we don't disclose that. They were saying, here's the information I'm sharing. We need to make a collective decision as a team. And now when that collective decision as a team is being made with all of the, all of the insurance, the D&O insurance and everything else that's covering that C staff, those decisions are being made in that C staff, boardroom or on the risk committee of the board. And then the CISO is left hung out to dry. That's going to yield two things, right? Either the one thing that it's going to yield is a change in that overall structure because of the way that the feds are going after, CISOs or breach reporting or name your laundry list, right? And the CISO or CSO level will be elevated to a seat of importance within the C-suite, or people won't want to be CISOs or CSOs anymore. Nobody's going to want to take on that kind of personal risk and accountability when much of what we do as CISOs is a team sport. I never, as a CISO, made a unilateral decision about whether or not we were going to accept a risk. I had to have my chief risk officer involved. I had to have my general counsel involved. I had to have, a laundry list of people that were a participant in that decision making, my head of audit. I had to have them making that decision together. Like if that collective group makes a bad decision and the answer is that the CISO gets taken out to a shallow grave in a cornfield and buried, then all of that internal trust necessary for a company to be successful is going to just disappear. And now we're going to have highly dysfunctional organizations because nobody's going to want to take accountability for those types of roles.
Yeah. I mean, it's when really you'd hope not doing anything illegal in their role, and they're constantly having to look over their shoulder that they might get sent to jail. All it's doing is taking away the positive impact that their role should be having on the business and the wider industry. So it's crazy.
Well, look, you don't get there's always the opportunity for a wild card. Like we've had people that worked in the U.S. government that have sold out U.S. interests. We've had stuff that's come down the pike with WikiLeaks and any number of things. There's always going to be the potential for a bad actor. But when you look at it on just a standard scale of probabilities, you don't become a CISO and go through the entire process and gaining of experience in the security space without having a particular type of personality. And that type of personality is not inclined, typically, always can be exceptions, not inclined to be making poorly informed ethical and moral decisions about what to do about security. It just is not the way that we're built. Now, we might be built half a cop and half a bad guy. I actually think those are the best security practitioners because we have to think like the enemy, right? But by and large, I have never met a senior level security person that I would go, man, that person's got some serious ethical, deficiencies, and maybe we should, think twice about their thoughts or their opinions or observations. It just isn't the way that this function has developed and evolved, and that makes it even more problematic because I know I've been on the receiving end of, we need to. I did a very deep analysis at one point in my corporate career and said years before it manifested as a problem, look, we need to do something about the risk of ransomware. And the response was, we do not have enough money. We do not have discretionary budget. We need you to continue to focus on the pillars of your security program, but we're not going to address this problem. And a year and a half after I left that company, they got popped with ransomware. And so that, the mechanics of this role are always going to be, up against that. We don't have the budget. We don't have we don't have a priority interest in that from a risk appetite standpoint. It doesn't mean that what we contribute is worthless, right? That is part of the job, knowing that what we ask for is sometimes going to get the thumbs down because it doesn't fit within the overall structure. If something goes bad from that after I'm given that presentation, and then it's said, Richard, you should have done something about that,
Couldn't be
then we
on
got
you.
we have a totally different set of conversations.
Absolutely. Well, in a short answer, would you want to be a CISO again with how the role has evolved over the last couple of years? Would you ever go back to that C-suite? Well, not so C-suite.
I think that it'd bifurcate that. For me, short answer is I'm a functional CISO today. I have the responsibility for operational product security at Traceable. I love it because most of my focus is really around how do we harden our capabilities, not necessarily how are we dealing with, as I saw recently in the news for Chase, 45 billion attacks a day. Like that is a different world. And I would say that my interest in returning to a corporate CISO world is slim and none and slim left town. I love all of my CISO colleagues and CSO colleagues that are out there doing it. I've either reached an age in my career where I'm not interested in being bothered with the nuisances that come with that job anymore, or I feel like my ability to create change across more than one company, across hundreds of companies, across dozens of nations. I'm more capable of doing that in my kind of role today than I would be in doing it for one company in a corporate CISO role as a job anymore. So that's really where I kind of land. Not afraid of it. Don't have any problems with it. It's been through that fire and loved it. Loved my experiences, but it has nothing to do with threats or risk or exploit or attack concerns that I have. It has more to do with where I want to be in my personal life now, and it's not dealing with the consequences of a massive breach somewhere.
And a corporate CISO might not be able to get away with dressing as Ricky Bobby either. So
probably not. A corporate
Well,
CISO would barely be able to get past legal to be able to go to the event to begin with. So
exactly. Well, Richard, thank you so much for coming on. Really enjoyed the conversation, and it's been a pleasure.
truly enjoyed it, and happy to do it again if opportunities and events permit. So
Absolutely.
We hope you've enjoyed this latest episode of CyberBytes The Podcast. Please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and tell your friends. If you want to explore being a guest or how Aspiron Search can help you build high-performing security and go-to-market teams, then get in touch on LinkedIn or info@aspironsearch.com.